Hey there, everybody. This is Kaylee McMahon with Number One Leading Ladies, the podcast by women for women, where we work to build each other up instead of tear each other down. We have a great guest with us today, Nora Sudduth, and I'm going to have her actually introduce herself because I won't do it justice. Nora, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Nora Sudduth. I am actually a co-founder of Hello Audio. I kind of came up through that corporate path, like that traditional path to success, if you will, but retired from corporate, started my own marketing agency, and I shut that down, but have been helping people sell things online. So far, I think I've helped people sell over $500 million of stuff online. So I haven't met a marketing campaign that I don't like, so that we haven't been able to help. So I'm excited to be here.
That is incredible. So what we do on our podcast is we talk a little bit about what is the real story and what does it really take in entrepreneurship to make it, and what does it look like, especially through a female's lens. So one of the things I like to talk about very first is, so for example, all of us have a different path to just get going. So some of us need to, for example, live with our parents. Some of us need to put their first business on a credit card. Some of us need to negotiate our way into things. You know, what is it really, the sacrifices that it really takes essentially, what did that look like for you to make those sacrifices? And then what did it take to then get to traction where you know that people out there say, oh, there's a product market fit, or there's a demand for this. What did that look like for you?
I love that. Because everyone not everyone. There are folks in this space that make it sound simple and make it sound so easy and don't really talk about the truth behind what it really takes. And I remember even going through that process and you know, the folks were like, oh, you can start an online business. And back then, granted, things were a little bit easier or a little bit different, right, than starting an online business today. But no one talked about the hours. The reality of the hours. No one really talked about the capital. It's like, oh, well, you can start an online business with nothing. And you're like, yeah, but there's a difference between, check equity and being able to write a check for things and sweat equity, which is, spending those hours with, in my case, having a full-time job. And so like many, I'm sure many of your guests, right? I started in that corporate path. I was climbing the corporate ladder thinking like, this is the path. And so, yeah, you can say it was a 9 to 5. That's not true, right? The reality is it was probably more of like a 7 to 7, or at a minimum, right? Like 8 to 6 kind of a thing. So it was a lot of hours. And I was a mom. I mean, I'm still a mom, but like a mom of young kids. And that makes it really challenging, with daycare and expenses and a mortgage. And that, I mean, I was the primary breadwinner of the house. So it wasn't like, and granted, I was so blessed to have my husband's income. So a lot of folks I realize and I recognize don't have that, and they are it. I think, looking back, it was like, well, if I didn't have the house and if I was single, and it could have just like, there was a lot of things that I didn't like, I don't care about. I'm not a car person. I don't need to drive a nice car. Like I probably could have just slept on a couch somewhere or in a studio. But for me personally, I had those other responsibilities. I had the financial responsibilities. I had gone through an MBA program in the evening. So I had student loans in addition to just normal everyday expenses and daycare and, mortgage and bills and all the stuff. And so for me, it was kind of, I'm more risk averse, right? I'm not that person who's like, screw it, everything will be fine. Or like it'll be, it'll work itself out, especially when kids are involved or, when I feel like I was financially responsible for other human lives, like that's a big deal. Yeah. And so for me, it was really taking a look at the assets that I had and really making sure that with the corporate salary, where can we cut back? What percentage of my salary was going to go into this new business? What was I willing to really sacrifice in terms of that sweat equity? How many hours was I really willing to work? It's easier with smaller kids when they nap because you're like, oh, I'm not really missing time with them, right? I might be missing sleep. And at that point, I didn't put a whole lot of value on sleep, not like I do now, right? Yeah. I, live and learn, and you kind of recognize that that's actually very important. Yeah. But it was a lot of really late nights or really early mornings. And it was looking at capital expenses. And granted, back then advertising, there were channels of advertising that were a lot cheaper than things are right now. And the cost to acquire a client did not look like it does today at the time of this recording, right? This was many years ago. And so it was very challenging, and it was hard to tell people that it was challenging and to be like, hey, I'm afraid, right? Who do you tell? Like, hey, I'm actually scared. I'm afraid that I might fail. But it wasn't just because of me failing. I'm like, yeah, who cares? It's me. But I didn't want to let my family down. I didn't want to, I didn't want to put them at risk because of a choice that I was making. And at that point, a lot of the gurus in the space and the folks that were teaching this stuff were guys. And they were guys that had wives that stayed at home with their kids. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, you're doing your thing, but I'm doing that and all the other things that your wife is doing right now. So how do we make this work? And no one talked about it.
Yep.
And so navigating that was really, really challenging to understand, how do you make this work? And it truly was one day at a time and trial and error. And for me personally, what I found is that I pushed too hard, and that I was burned out or I was exhausted. And I really had to do a better job of listening to my body and really making choices that sometimes were maybe one week I'd make a choice to stay up all night or to, stay up till 2 a.m. And the next day I had to make a different choice. Right. And so it was very much a day-to-day kind of a thing, just knowing though, at the end of the day, that I was making progress, which made it even more important for me personally to make sure that every investment I make, whether it was my time or capital, every step I took was the right one in the right direction, right? And it's like, what the right next step, what's now, what's next kind of a thing. And so that, to me, knowing that and having a path forward that I felt confident in helped me navigate that when there was so much risk and so much sacrifice.
When you were making those decisions, like, for example, I took an accelerator, and there are other ways you can look at things like the bullseye method, lean method, and trying to figure out how do I essentially, like on ads or doing any kind of expense, like trying to figure out what is the least amount that I need to test with different sources to figure out where to then put in money, because then you're getting the right return on investment. I guess my question is, when it came to trying to figure all of that out and then getting to traction to see like, okay, maybe I'm going to test I think there's 13 or 18 traction channels or something that you can try. During that process of trying and getting to figure out what worked, and then getting to say, oh, this one I've got demand on, what did that look like?
Yeah. So in that whole path to product market fit, right? And really understanding, am I there? What does it take?
Yeah.
And you'll notice, like, most people in this space, like, they don't teach that, right? At least not in the way that we would have appreciated it being taught. Like, can you just give me the path? Like, just tell me what it is. And it's, for me personally, because I had come from a business background and I had a business backbone really kind of coming into it, it was easier. And I love numbers. I love spreadsheets. I love planning, right? So I had an advantage, and I fully acknowledged that going into it, that I had that business backbone. So I kind of knew, like, what's a statistically significant number, right? What is it, working backward, how much do I want to make, right? You go through the math, because all it is math. What am I going to sell? What is the price point, right? What do I need to do? What's the market for this based on the market size? If I get feedback from X people, is that statistically significant to give me enough data in order for me to make decisions moving forward, right? And you're never going to be 100%. Like, if you're in this space and you're trying to, create a business, no matter what business it is, you're never going to get that 100% confidence. It just doesn't exist, right? There's always going to be something that you're like, well, maybe this was a fluke, and maybe it's because I sent an email on a holiday weekend, or whatever that might be, right? So I think for me, it was, I personally went offline before I went online.
Yeah. Because
to me, the folks I was following at the time, I was like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. And I was like, do you have a business background? Could you teach you this? Because this just seems a little like off. And I didn't want to misstep, and I didn't want to spend money or time where it was a waste, because it was such a premium. Like that, my time it's such a premium. And so what I ended up doing was going offline. So instead of immediately going into ads, I worked my network around me. So that's what a lot of folks that start online businesses, they forget that they're already connected. They forget about their existing reach.
Yeah.
Yes, that is, at that time, social media looked different. The profile looked a little bit different, and the channels looked a little bit different than they do today.
Yes.
But what about your physical network? the folks that, for me, it was like, okay, what about my kids, like my kid's dentist and like my kid's social, like, all of those people that you forget about because everyone's like, oh, online. And you forget about the people around you who already know you, who already know your values, who already know how you work and in your personality. So you already have that your foot in the door, if you will, right? That relationship, that connection. And that's where I started because I felt like, why wouldn't I get those data points first before I go invest a bunch of money in that black box of an internet, right? That we're like, we don't really know what's out there. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Or there's a lot of things that aren't really clear. Why not start with what I already know? That's what I ended up doing.
I think being in the situation that you were in was probably a pretty good blessing, to tell you the truth, because there's times where, I don't have kids and maybe I don't have to say, well, I need this to feed them, and so I'm going to go hire someone and take a shot with someone that maybe, like, I think I'm being clear with what I need them to produce, but maybe I haven't worked with a development team before, and so then I'm way off, and then you're spending money and time, and it's all whatever. So I think that was a really big blessing, and a lot of women that are hopefully listening to this and watching this later, instead of getting discouraged and saying, well, I just don't have it, it's like you do have it, but it just becomes very, very sacred. And so that's actually a good thing, so there's probably time and money that I've spent that I'm looking back going, why did I do that, without being kind of, I hate to say it, like a hard ass, and saying, like, with marketers, I'm always like, no, like, if you can't show me that this does this, there's no way I'm spending $600, like,
I appreciate
and they hate
the fact that you're trying to experiment, but let's do that with someone else's
money.
Yeah,
not mine. And they hate me because of that. And I'm like, well, that's great. You can go work with an enterprise level client, but I'm a startup, so, and I think for me as a woman, sometimes it was hard for me to, like, even say that and have those boundaries because you're like worried about how the other person's going to feel. So I would say that my better experience, hiring people early on was a referral from someone that I personally knew, that I trusted, that they had paid that person, they had worked full cycle with that person, they could vouch for them, but not my friend. Like, that would probably be the best.
Referrals are everything.
Yeah.
No matter if your first hire or your seventh hire and you're getting a COO, referrals are everything, right? And it's, if nothing else, that it increases your likelihood of success.
Yeah.
In an already very challenging environment, right? I think I was really lucky because I have a tech background.
Yeah.
My first degree was in computer science. Tech doesn't scare me. I've managed development teams. I was managing multi-million-dollar budgets, right? So I think I came into that with an advantage because I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty.
Yeah.
I wasn't afraid to fail or to mess up because that's kind of what this is. It's
iterating.
It's a series of experiments.
We're just iterating, yeah.
The thing about whether it's a marketing campaign or what, especially with product market fit, you're running a series of experiments to test your hypothesis, right? Not to bring everybody back to that like horrific 7th grade science fair that it was so much fun, but it's like you have to set your hypothesis. You think this is going to work. You're going into it with intelligent guesses, right? You're educated guesses. Reasoning based on evidence that you have. You're making the best decision you have with the data that the best decision you can with the data you have, and you're running those experiments where you have to really be more discerning, especially as a female in business. Is like, it is your money and you are in charge. You get to decide what experiments you run and what experiments you're comfortable starting with, and which ones you're like, yeah, I hear you, but we're not going to do that. Right. We're going to and listen to your intuition, too. I think that's a big thing for a lot of women is they're like, I kind of knew that hiring that coach wouldn't have been, wasn't a good idea, or I didn't resonate with them, or like there seems something off. Yep. You do need to listen to your intuition, especially in those early stages.
100%. Well, thank you for being so transparent and sharing, like, really kind of in your virtual reality goggles, like what that was like, because I just want women to see this and not get themselves discouraged because of a story in their head of how they think it's going to work versus, hey, here's how it really does work for other females in different industries. So I want to ask a couple more questions.
Sure.
And I think I'm going to ask this one next. What would be your biggest lesson?
For me, it was fear. I'm very much an introvert. I'm sure many people watching this, and they're like, oh, I don't want to put myself out there. I was the same way. I'm a lot more comfortable now on camera, and I show up and do, group coachings and stuff like that. So it doesn't faze me as much. But early days, there was a lot of fear. And so it was like, how do I take action in the face of fear? And how do I get past that? And we can talk about mindset work. We can talk about all the things, right? There's a lot of great people out there that teach this. There's a lot of great techniques. At the end of the day, you have to figure out what's going to work for you, because what works for someone else to move past fear and take action isn't always going to work for you. And there's no shame. There's nothing wrong with you if that technique doesn't work for you. We're all built and wired very differently, and we all have very different sources of fear. Whether that's, hey, you work a full-time job and you're nervous about your boss finding out because you're not quite ready for that to happen yet. Totally understand that.
Yep.
Whether it's, a fear of rejection coming back, whether it's, people don't appreciate what you're saying online, or you're taking a stance online and you're worried about trolls, which they're out there. They're
oh my God.
Happen. Like, that's
they
just
love
part
me.
of this.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just part of this.
If you're making a difference, you'll always have a target on your back. Just accept that.
Always.
Like, I've created a security company literally for that purpose, because it's like, women need to stay in business and not have these threats shut us down. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. No, but it's it, right? And I think that's part of it is, for me, it was staying connected to other women who actually got it and understood what it was like. Not these, and no offense to the guys, like, we love you guys. And it's a very different experience when you're a female, trying to run a business, trying to grow a business, especially, if you've got that family, you've got other responsibilities, maybe you're caretaker for your elderly parent. Like, we all have stuff going on. And it's a different experience, I feel like, for us versus some of the guys that were out there, especially at the time when I was doing it, that were out there teaching. And it was like, you wake up at 5 every morning. And I'm like, I wake up when the baby wakes me up because it was, he's screaming or whatever it was at the time, right? Like, it was like, that's not reality.
Yeah.
So I think for me, staying connected to other women that got it, and we can have these transparent conversations versus the people who had success and just felt like they needed to sugarcoat it. Right? We don't need to sugarcoat it. We need to help each other get through it.
Right.
Because that's the reality of what it's going to take to get us through those things. And so staying connected, I think, helped me personally get through those moments of fear or hesitation. And then I think it's always worthwhile to be curious, right? There's no use in shaming yourself for being afraid, or shaming yourself for what does that do? It does no good. It doesn't benefit. It doesn't serve you at all. So instead, get really curious. Why am I hesitating? Why am I afraid? Okay, so go through the scenarios, right? If I put my message out there, if I put my offer out there and someone says no, who gives a, who gives a rat's? It was like, but it's one of those things where you have to really honor yourself and get curious and stay away from the shame game or the blame game, because that's not going to serve you. And the more you can connect with people like this, the folks that are watching this, the folks that are listening to this, right, who get it, who have been there, and it can be honest with you, the easier it's going to be to take those actions, because it's going to be those actions. We all might know how to create I think a lot of folks probably listening to this, how to create $1 million business. The knowledge is there, but there's a gap between knowing and doing, and that's where you need the support.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. Like, I could go on for days about this, but I've tried to really change my life recently, and it's kind of difficult when you talk to other people who either in that situation you kind of said, like, they aren't doing it, so, like, they might have advice, but that advice came from somebody else, so it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to put that in my back pocket. Thank you, I love you, but hugs and kisses, but, I'm going to put that in my back pocket. And then the other thing is like, I even bump up to this all the time. An unpleasant experience happens, whether it's a argument or, my identity's been stolen recently. Like, there's all kinds of things that you go through in life, that you're like, I'm going to bump up against this uncomfortable thing. Yeah. But you had said something earlier I love that has really changed my life, and it's part of, like, neuro-linguistic programming, where essentially it's like, in that moment I have the ability to be curious instead of fearful. And even in this situation, it's like, okay, well, where was the breach? And who did I touch that gave me the breach? And, to be able to figure that out. And so then what happens is that creates a solution, whether it's just for myself or for other people too. And then growth happens versus being stuck in that paralyzed fear phase of getting nothing done, So
yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
That's great.
And I would say that curiosity tool helped me shift things. And I'm very analytical, right? I'm very curious. I love solving puzzles. Like, that's just the engineer in me. So, but when I was able to because that's not natural. I mean, yes, it's natural, but the curiosity thing isn't natural for me. Shame is natural for me, right? It's like, what did I do wrong? That was like always like, what, I always looked inward, and you don't have to blame other people, but you can get curious about it. And just that switch alone kind of allows you to stay neutral a little bit, like the circumstance, whatever thing you're going to bump up against, just like that's a neutral kind of thing that's happening, and now just examine it. And that from that place of your mind, like you're able to solution a lot better, you're able to see a lot more clearly than if you were emotionally charged kind of trying to do those things.
And that's super, super critical as a leader. So obviously when you're starting your own business, whether you become CEO or become COO or whatever your genius zone is, being able to, for example, tell everyone in your life, or even tell yourself, it's here's the situation and here's me. Like I am not the situation. I'm not in the situation. Here's the situation. Let's look at it, be curious about it. And I mean, that's the only way. For example, like for me, I tend to work myself to death, where I have to I always take a Sunday off. The only way I can do that mentally is by looking at these challenges as here is the situation and here's me. You know what I mean? And then looking at it, like you said, from the observer perspective. So that's, absolutely critical. So, I mean, all these lessons are very, very awesome. I'm so happy that you've shared them with us. What would you say has been your biggest win?
Oh, man. Surviving it, right? Like surviving and not giving up, I think is huge, right? Like, I think it would have been so much easier just to be like, you know what? I'll stay in my like cushy 6-figure corporate job and my 401k and just kind of like do my thing. But I would have never gotten to experience all the other, things that I've experienced and the connections and the people and, the impact, I think is the other big win for me is like by being able to navigate that and not giving up and pursuing it and going through the hard parts, right? I think that to me is the biggest win because it has enabled all the other good things that have come out of it, right? The connections, the impact we're making for clients, like all of that was able to be made possible because I kept going. And I think that's like, I'm not one to give myself credit, probably like a lot of folks listening, like it's hard to do, but I would say if that's my biggest win is I kept going and I was able to make that impact and see the benefits of that.
100%. This was a great interview, great start to Monday, because there's just so many things that you've said that just I've been thinking recently. And I think that every entrepreneur, whether just like your financial literacy journey, you're at a different phase, but all of us have either been here or we're here or whatnot. I guess the only couple of questions I have, because like you'd mentioned, to get through it and not just to keep pushing, like banging your head up against a wall, but to know like where to keep pushing, really revolves around that network. And something that I've noticed is that women and minorities tend to lack a powerful network, which is where 80% of your off-market opportunities exist. Typically those networks come from an Ivy League school that you went to, your neighborhood, or like a Fortune 500 company that you worked for. So typically women and minorities don't have those. So when it came to finding that network in business that you're able to be really transparent with, how did you find them? And are you still involved with them, or is it several?
I think it is several, but I think one of the things, coming out of, to your point, if we take away the networks from corporate or the networks from your school or all of those things, and we just kind of look at like what's around us. And sometimes, like, I know for me, like my mom still has no idea what I do for a living, God bless her, right? It's like there's that social network that aren't necessarily going to be my ideal clients, or the social network around me physically that isn't necessarily going to be the conduit to be, into that group that's really going to help my business grow. I think it's about paying attention to the people you resonate with, paying attention to the folks who have achieved the things that you want to achieve, and don't be afraid to reach out and connect. Right. So whether you're listening to this episode or you're listening to, you're noticing other women that you really resonate with their style or their personality, don't ever be afraid to reach out and connect with them. And, where are they hanging out? Where are those groups of folks? There's groups on Facebook, there's groups on LinkedIn, there's groups, and it always changes, right? Because social media is changing and online, communities are changing. What are those associations that may not have a cost to it at all,
right,
that you could maybe get involved in and start connecting with people? But the biggest thing, I think, is when you're looking at that, don't assume it's coming to you.
Yeah.
You need to really pursue and connect with folks, and don't be afraid. I know some introverts, I'm here, right? I'm like reporting for duty. You still have to reach out and make that connection. But when it comes from a genuine place, and it's not like, hey, I want to sell you something. Hey, I want you to, be my client. It's just really genuinely connecting with other humans on that level.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot easier to take that risk, if you will, and reach out.
100%. Well, Nora, would you let our audience know what they can reach out to you to participate with, or what are the possibilities of participating with you, and how do they also get a hold of you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at norasudduth.com or on Instagram at Nora Sudduth. You can also look at Hello Audio. So we have helloaudio.fm. You can reach me there as well. Helloaudio.fm is the software tool that does private podcasts, which is kind of cool to be able to connect in kind of a different way than most people are used to. But yeah, you can reach me on any of those channels, and I would love to connect with you.
Absolutely. Nora, thank you so much for your time today. And for everybody listening and watching later, of course, you know how to get a hold of Nora now. And of course, you can go to Number One Leading Ladies off of theapartmentqueen.com. There is a link where you can see all of these episodes. And then please stay tuned for next week's episode, or a couple weeks from now. We look forward to having you really get enrolled with what it feels like to make it in business, and really understand who you can also still reach out to. Like, these podcasts are real people, real women that you can reach out to, like Nora had said earlier, on your journey, because we can't do it alone. I mean, really, women are very, very good at collaborative efforts. So I just want to put that out there. Any of our podcast guests now or next week, you have the ability to be able to connect and build your network. Nora, thank you so much for being on today, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week on Number One Leading Ladies.